One small remark that you guys made, that you can't really understand how it's possible for Peterson to believe in free will while at the same time being a psychologist. I can't go into this in detail here, but you have noticed that free will is an intrinsic part of integral theory, right? You have noticed that free will is simply termed agency in integral theory, and it exists all the way down. So wherever there is a conscious locus of attention, however far down you push that also appears as something that has agency or free will. Now, free will, of course, comes in degrees in integral theory, and free will is something that you have to learn. And even though the free will to lift your arm deliberately is different from the free will to think a different thought, which again is different from the free will when a dog moves from point A to point B. They have something in common, which is that free will or spontaneity, as it also has been called, exists within a space of possibilities. And by possibilities, I mean that which is within your reach, to use a metaphor. Actually, Edmund Husserl uses attention as the prime example of free will or spontaneity. Your ability to focus your attention is unconditional. You just do it, or as Husserl says, I can. It is an experience that we are free, and freedom, of course, doesn't mean that that our freedom is not restrained. Freedom always exists within bounds, within certain spaces that are available to us, and we can't choose. We are not free for that which is outside of our grasp. So in other words, we are free to practice, but we are not really free to feel our hands as differentiated a way as a musician does after he has practiced for years. When he feels like his hands are waking up, from anesthesia, local anesthesia. He has so much more consciousness in his hands, so much more differentiated experience. And once experience has been differentiated and everything goes right, we usually can control it. We can focus our attention on it, and it is something that is in our control. This is a differential experience, namely the experience of freedom. It's a differential experience that also makes a difference. It's a difference that makes a difference. Now, I can't really go into detail in explaining all this, but the major point is that this concept of freedom is pretty similar to that of Peterson, where you also have to develop your freedom. Freedom is not simply something you're born with, even though of course you're born with freedom, but the differential space, the space of possibilities which are open to you, is something that has to grow, and that only happens if you focus your attention and wait for transformation to happen. Effort, in other words, is a difference that makes a difference in our personal lives, and I think this is the only thing that we need to retain here. How it's on a theoretical level possible to at the same time hold the notion of free will and hold the notion of science, which assumes determinism. Well, I thought I didn't want to go into that, but just to give a brief hint, integral theory doesn't believe in determinism. In integral theory, nothing is determined, but determinism is a perspective on reality, which doesn't really explain reality and the processes that are going on. An example that Wilber is bringing in Sex Ecology Spirituality, in a footnote where he's dealing with this problem of determinism and how determinism and free will are actually compatible, is that laws are actually not really explanatory, usually not. Laws are just as one could take the existence of consciousness to be something foundational that cannot be broken down into more simple constitutive units. Laws in this way cannot be broken down into more simple explanations. But what they do is they don't explain a phenomenon in a sense that they don't take it apart and say why it necessarily does what it does. But what laws do is they describe its behavior and they describe the likelihood of a certain kind of behavior. And Wilber gives examples that the problem with laws is that dependent on what kind of holon they're dealing with, when they're dealing with the most complex holons, laws are not really applicable. They don't work. We have the problem of complexity where we're not able to predict the behavior of complex systems. And at the level of the most simple holons, where the law actually has predictive power over the holon's behavior, the problem still remains that the law still doesn't explain the behavior. It doesn't, in other words, say why an atom is doing what it is doing at a specific moment. We often mistake these predictions for actual explanations, while what they are perspectives that show us regularities in the world, but they don't really explain these regularities. This is the direction in which Wilber is going. So determinism is not something that is in the object, but determinism is a perspective that we're applying on objects. We never are in touch with an object as such. There never is matter as such. There is nothing that is just an atom and nothing else. Atoms are concepts. This gives integral theory a sort of an idealist bent, but it is also what makes science possible, and doesn't fall into a very incoherent version of materialism, which can't even reflect upon itself as a theory. I can't really go into detail about all of this, but I just wanted to point out integral theory has a place for freedom and agency. And integral theory believes that it can still retain at the same time what we have so far been doing as science, but we have to reinterpret what science has been doing. This in any case. We are not dealing with pure objects here, but we are rather dealing, and science is dealing, with a perspective on objects that are the friction to our perspectives, but never really available as such, except of course in absolute consciousness, or in absolute knowledge, as Wilber puts it. But that is not a kind of knowledge that tells you something specific about reality. It's not a relational kind of knowledge, or relative knowledge, as he puts it. You're not relating objects in absolute knowledge. You're not coming out of a state of absolute knowledge and saying something specific about the world that could be true or false. So that's an entirely different category of knowledge, if you want to call it knowledge at all.